Some women don't wait to be remembered, they haunt. Not with noise, not with demand, but with essence. With the lingering trace of a soul that moved through his psyche like a shadow in candlelight, soft and unforgettable. She never forced her way into his mind. She arrived like smoke, like a scent from a distant past, like something he swore he never needed, until it echoed in his dreams when the world fell silent. Carl Jung would tell you, she's the anima, the archetype of feminine energy embedded in every man's unconscious. But not every woman awakens it. Only a certain kind, the one who slips past his defenses through the cracks of his ego and touches the tender, ancient place he hides from himself. She is not the loudest in the room. She is the one whose absence aches like a phantom limb. She does not seduce with words. Her silence is the seduction. She listens more than she speaks, not because she's timid, but because she knows the power of stillness. In a world drunk on performance, her restraint is rebellion. She doesn't overshare. She leaves room for mystery, room for imagination, room for him to project, to wonder, to reach. And that reaching, that hunger to know her, is where obsession begins. She does not chase. She drifts, not as a strategy, but because she is not dependent on being seen. She exists in a state of wholeness. And when a woman is whole, her presence doesn't demand attention. It commands it, not by effort, but by frequency. She moves through life like she belongs to no one, not even the moment. And men, they follow that kind of freedom like moths to flame. She is deeply present, but never fully available. Emotionally alive, but not emotionally exposed. She understands the dance between openness and sovereignty. She gives, but not all. She reveals, but never everything. And it's that almost that lingers in a man's psyche. That elusive thread of her essence he can't quite grasp. That eternal, what if, that replays at midnight when sleep won't come. She doesn't play games, she holds gravity. There's nothing childish about her pull. She is woman, not girl. Sacred, not sweet. She doesn't seek validation through seduction. Her allure is effortless. It's not about how she looks, it's how she makes him feel in her presence. Safe and stirred, grounded and electrified, like something ancient in him is waking up. And when she disappears, whether by fate or choice, it's not just the loss of a person. It's the disappearance of a portal to something deeper, something truer. That's what haunts him. Not her laughter, not her touch, but the reflection of himself she allowed him to glimpse. The man he was in her presence. The man he might have become had she stayed. She is rare because she's done the work, the shadow work, the soul excavation. She has sat with her pain, made peace with her past, and doesn't ask a man to complete her. That's why she doesn't beg for attention. She doesn't audition for love. She doesn't barter her body for crumbs of connection. Her worth is non-negotiable, not because she says it, but because she lives it. And if you're watching this, you may be her, or you're becoming her. You feel in your bones. You've stopped chasing, started choosing. You've outgrown the need to be needed. You've realized that your silence can say more than your words ever could. That your absence can echo louder than your presence when it's aligned with truth. He dreams of her because she showed him something real, and real doesn't fade. He obsesses because she mirrored back the parts of himself he abandoned long ago. He cannot forget because forgetting her would mean forgetting his own soul's longing. And that he cannot bear. She moves like water, soft but untouchable. He tries to contain her, to define her, but she flows through his fingers every time. And it drives him mad in the most deliciously cruel way. For she is not meant to be grasped. She is meant to be experienced. Briefly, brilliantly, burned into the subconscious like a symbol in a Jungian dream. In the ancient myths, she is the muse, the siren, the priestess at the edge of the forest, both the longing and the warning. She doesn't announce her presence. She appears, not in the flesh, but in flashes, glimpses, echoes. Her impact is not always immediate, but it's deep. Weeks later, when his world is quiet and distractions have thinned, she visits. In memory, in dreams, In the in-between spaces of his mind, he doesn't speak about. And what does she do that others don't? She honors her time like a sacred ritual. She doesn't scatter her energy. She invests it with intention. She can sit in silence for hours and feel full. She can walk away from what doesn't feel right, even if it once felt irresistible. She doesn't return to comfort that costs her dignity. The kind of discipline doesn't just attract, it disrupts. Because it reflects a standard he may not be ready to meet. Her boundaries are quiet, but unbreakable. They're not spoken with force. They're embedded in her posture, her gaze, her decisions. You feel them when she declines a call, when she doesn't respond to emotional chaos, when she walks away instead of fighting for a connection that drains her. And a man? He notices, because she doesn't set fire to prove a point. She leaves without smoke. Carl Jung taught that the anima, the feminine archetype within the male unconscious, is a powerful, often misunderstood force. And when a man meets a woman who embodies that energy in the flesh, it feels both magnetic and destabilizing. She doesn't just attract his attention. She awakens his unconscious. And that can feel like danger or like destiny. She doesn't mirror what he wants. She reflects what he needs. And often, that's more than he's ready to receive. She doesn't stroke the ego. She pierces it, not with cruelty, but with clarity. She has no interest in coddling illusions. Her energy is precise, focused. She sees him, not the performance, not the projection him. And being seen that clearly is both terrifying and intoxicating. Most women were taught to seek safety in being chosen. She found power in choosing herself. She became her own sanctuary. And in doing so, she stopped craving the validation that once enslaved her. And now men feel that. The absence of desperation, the purity of her presence. It's so rare, so potent, that it lingers in every room she leaves. She is not the fantasy. She is the revelation. And that's why she enters dreams without permission. Because the mind craves fantasy, but the soul craves truth. And she is truth in a human form. Not perfect, not polished, but embodied. Rooted, raw. She doesn't sparkle to impress. She glows because she is lit from within. And when she is gone, when her silence replaces her voice, when her scent fades from his clothes, when the echo of her laughter is all that remains, he realizes he didn't lose a woman. He lost a mirror to his depth, a mirror to his hunger, a mirror to what was possible if only he'd dare to go there with her. But she won't chase, not because she doesn't feel, but because she respects the sacredness of her own energy. She knows when a man is ready, truly ready, he won't need to be chased. He'll return not out of fear, but out of reverence. Not for possession, but for partnership. She does not declare her value with noise. Her absence teaches it better than any words ever could. There is something about the woman who doesn't fill every silence, who doesn't reach out just to feel wanted, who doesn't explain her distance. That woman, the one who can be present without performing and absent without guilt, reprograms a man's emotional compass. And it starts to haunt him. At first, it's subtle, a shift in his rhythm. The moments he used to breeze through now feel quieter. Empty. A song plays, and he remembers the way she would close her eyes, not to listen, but to feel. He laughs at something and immediately imagines how she would have smiled, not because it was funny, but because he was alive in it. She doesn't haunt him like a ghost. She haunts him like contrast. The difference between what is and what was when she was there. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this woman? She becomes that mirror of the unconscious, not through confrontation, but through contrast. She never told him what he needed to change. She just left. And in her leaving, she held up a mirror to his own emptiness, his disconnection, his surface-level chase for attention over intimacy. And now, she lives in the cracks of his psyche, in the pause before he texts someone new, in the silence after another shallow conversation, in the restlessness that no amount of distraction can calm. Because what he lost wasn't attention, it was alignment. What vanished wasn't validation, It was the chance to become something more beside her. She doesn't compete. She doesn't plead. She doesn't become louder to stay relevant. Instead, she withdraws elegantly, fully, without blame or bitterness. And that grace, that quiet exit without a storm, leaves him bewildered, because he was taught to associate value with drama, affection with availability. But she shattered that myth simply by not playing the game. She does not seek revenge. She seeks resonance. If something no longer aligns with her spirit, she doesn't destroy it, she detaches from it. And when she detaches, it is final, because she understands that closure doesn't require a conversation. Sometimes the deepest closure is silence. The kind that forces a man to sit with the version of himself that failed to meet her at the level she lived on. This is not about superiority. It's about sovereignty. She doesn't walk away because she's better. She walks away because she refuses to shrink. She is not afraid of loneliness. She has danced with it, befriended it, transformed it into solitude. And solitude, in a feminine soul, becomes power. Because when a woman no longer fears being alone, she cannot be controlled through attention. And that's the kind of woman who slips into dreams, uninvited, yes, but not unwelcome. Because somewhere inside him, beneath all the bravado and detachment, he knows. He knows he missed something rare. Not rare in beauty, rare in energy, in depth, in truth. She made him feel seen in a way that didn't ask for performance. She loved him without needing him. And that paradox? It broke him open. He may not be ready for that kind of love. Most aren't. Not until life humbles them. Not until the ego cracks. Not until silence becomes unbearable. But she won't wait for him to catch up. She's not static. She's a current, a force. She moves forward, always, not bitterly, but bravely. And in her forward motion, she becomes legend. Not the kind told with stories, but the kind that lingers in spaces. A scent in the air, a song in the distance, a feeling he can't name, but aches to feel again. Because the woman who enters dreams uninvited doesn't need to knock. She already lives in the places he hides from. And now, she owns the keys. She doesn't steal hearts. She activates them, not with strategy or seduction, but with soul. Her presence, even fleeting, awakens something ancestral in him, a knowing, a hunger, a grief he didn't know he carried. She doesn't give him comfort. She gives him contrast. And in that contrast, he feels the parts of himself he abandoned long ago just to survive. It's why he can't shake her. Because she wasn't just a woman, she was a moment of awakening. A glitch in his matrix. A rupture in his routine. She was the stillness in a world addicted to noise. The depth in a culture obsessed with surfaces. And now that she's gone, everything else feels insufficient. Too loud. Too bright. Too hollow. Jung knew that the feminine, when it truly penetrates the male psyche, doesn't enter with force. It seeps in like poetry, like scent, like longing. She doesn't knock down doors. She lingers behind them. And her silence says more than 1,000 declarations of love ever could. Because it isn't just absence, it's sovereign absence. The kind that commands attention precisely because it asks for none. When she was near, he may have overlooked her mystery, dismissed her softness, taken for granted her ability to be both tender and untouchable. But now that her energy is gone, he sees the difference. He feels it in his bones, in the way other women feel like shadows of what he once held and didn't hold tightly enough. And she never warned him. That's the thing. She never threatened to leave. She never gave ultimatums. She simply watched, observed, gave chances. And when she finally walked away, it wasn't a storm. It was a ghosting of the soul. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She just withdrew her light. And now, he's left in the dark with himself. With every projection, every avoidance, every place he refused to meet her. And that, more than her departure, is what breaks him. Because what haunts him isn't her leaving, it's the realization that she waited. That she invited him to rise again and again, and he stayed small. This woman? She doesn't stay for potential. She moves with presence. She doesn't fall in love with promises, she reads patterns. And when the pattern is avoidance, emotional laziness, or disrespect masked as independence, she retreats. Not as punishment, as protection, because the sacred doesn't beg to be seen. It waits, and if unseen, it disappears. But when it does, it etches itself into the memory. She becomes the silhouette in his quietest hour, the softest ache in his most prideful moment. He'll say he's fine. He'll act unfazed. But late at night, when the ego sleeps and the soul speaks, he'll remember. He'll replay conversations, moments, touches. He'll look for her in others. Try to recreate what was never meant to be replicated. Because she wasn't a type. She was a moment in time, an initiation, a mirror. And not every man is ready for that level of reflection. Most aren't. That's why she's unforgettable. She doesn't flood him with attention. She makes space for him to rise, for him to meet her there. And if he doesn't, she leaves, not out of malice, but out of respect. For herself, for her energy, for the love she no longer wastes on empty vessels. And as she walks into new chapters, he will wonder. Not because she was perfect, but because she was true. And truth, once touched, can't be undone. It echoes. It waits. It returns in dreams, in quiet moments, in all the places pride cannot silence. Because some women don't enter to be kept. They enter to awaken. And the tragedy is never in losing them. It's in not becoming the man who could have kept them. She doesn't shimmer with performance. She radiates from depth. The woman who lives in a man's subconscious doesn't craft herself to be desired. She simply is, and that being disrupts everything artificial he thought he wanted. Her beauty is not loud. It's not even the first thing he notices, but it's the last thing he forgets. Because it's not the kind that flatters the ego, it confronts the soul. She doesn't wear masks. And for a man used to illusions, that kind of realness is disarming, unsettling, addictive. He didn't see it at first. She arrived gently, like a breeze through an open window. She didn't demand his gaze. She occupied the room with quiet command. When she laughed, it wasn't for approval. When she listened, it wasn't to respond. Her presence was a form of stillness, one that mirrored back the chaos inside him. And the more he tried to define her, the more she slipped through his fingers. Because she's not linear. She's layered. Like dreams he only half remembered in the morning. Like poetry written in a language he hadn't yet learned. The deeper he looked, the more he saw of himself. Not his persona, not the polished mask he wore, but his wounds. His hunger, his longing for wholeness. She never tried to heal him. That wasn't her purpose. She wasn't there to be his savior. She was there to reflect what he'd buried. And in her presence, he felt things he couldn't intellectualize. He was magnetized not by her availability, but by her sovereignty. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the inner feminine within the male psyche. Repressed, misunderstood, and often projected. And this woman, without knowing it, awakened that archetype. She lit the lantern in his shadow, not with strategy, but with stillness, with her refusal to abandon herself for the sake of being chosen. She doesn't seek validation. She seeks truth, and her boundaries are not walls. They are invitations to grow, to rise, to meet her at the level where she lives, not in fantasy, but in depth. She doesn't flirt with potential. She watches patterns, and if his presence can't hold her truth, she leaves. Lovingly, entirely, and still, he dreams of her, because it wasn't what she said. It was how she saw him, before he earned it, before he proved it. She saw the king beneath the wounds, the poet behind the performer, the stillness beneath the storm. And that level of seeing, that is intimacy few men are ever prepared to receive. Now, when he's alone, in the quiet moments of his success, in the silence after the noise dies down, she returns. Not as a regret, as a reference to what was real, to what was possible, to what he couldn't hold because he hadn't yet become the man capable of holding it. And she moves on like the moon, always watching, never chasing. Not angry, not bitter, but changed, sharpened, refined, because she doesn't lose when a man fails to meet her. She learns, she transforms, She sheds another layer of illusion and grows even more untouchable, not because she is cold, but because she has chosen warmth over chaos, peace over performance, soul over ego. Men will chase noise, but they remember depth. They may not admit it, but they crave the woman who made them feel something they can't describe, who touched not their body, but their becoming, who didn't try to seduce them, and yet seduced them beyond return. Because the woman who enters dreams uninvited, she doesn't knock on doors. She leaves keys in the places he wasn't ready to look. And one day, when the performance ends and the masks fall, he will retrace every step that led her away and understand it was never her silence that haunted him, but the sound of his own soul finally waking up. She never needed to say goodbye. Her absence was louder than any farewell. And it wasn't the volume of her silence that broke him, it was the clarity of it, like cold water against a fevered face, like the pause between two heartbeats where everything shifts and nothing feels the same. This woman didn't raise her voice to be heard. She didn't plead, didn't perform, didn't chase. She simply withdrew her magic, that elusive, feminine current, nurturing, yet boundaried, radiant, yet restrained. She gave him space to become, and when he used that space to stay small, she vanished without a storm. Only the sacred leave like that, with grace sharper than vengeance, with silence that echoes through every room he enters after her. Because it was never her body that haunted him, it was her presence, the way she looked at him like she already knew his greatness, even when he didn't believe it himself, the way she loved with detachment, not from disinterest, but from discipline, because she had done her work. She had met her own shadow. She no longer poured herself into the broken pieces of others, hoping it would make them stay. She no longer confused being chosen with being cherished. And so, she became a mirror he couldn't break, a dream he couldn't rewrite. He will try to replace her, of course, with loud laughter, louder nights, temporary warmth, and temporary women. But every one of them will feel like a whisper next to her thunderous silence. Because they weren't her. They didn't hold her gravity. They didn't demand his evolution without saying a word. Carl Jung understood this phenomenon deeply, that what we fail to integrate, we project. And when a man is face to face with a woman who embodies the divine feminine, the part of his psyche he has disowned, he is both mesmerized and terrified. Because loving her means confronting everything he has suppressed. His vulnerability, his need to be seen without armor, his longing to be led by softness rather than control. She did not enter his life to entertain. She entered to initiate. And now she exists in him like a myth, half memory, half warning. The curve of her back when she turned away becomes symbolic. The cadence of her laughter, a haunting rhythm he can't replicate. Her scent, her silence, the way her fingers once trailed across his shoulder, these are not just memories. They are imprints. Because when a woman loves from wholeness and then withdraws, it doesn't leave a void. It leaves a revelation, a space where the false self used to live. A question that rattles the bones. Why couldn't I rise to meet her? And it's not that she was perfect. She wasn't. But she was present. And presence is the rarest seduction of all. Especially in a world of distractions, of endless scrolls and shallow connections. She felt like depth, like roots, like ancient truth wrapped in soft skin. And she never needed to ask for more. Her energy was the request. Her silence was the boundary. Her gaze was the invitation. Now he sits in the aftermath, among friends who never knew her, lovers who never felt her, moments that feel flatter than they should. And he knows, not in words, but in waves, that something sacred passed through him. And he didn't hold it with the reverence it required. She doesn't hate him. She doesn't even think of him with anger. She thinks of him with stillness, with the quiet sadness of someone who once saw gold in a man who refused to dig. And now she watches the world from a distance he no longer has access to. She doesn't remind him of what he lost. The world does. In every woman who talks but never listens, in every hand that touches but never sees him. He feels it, not as regret, but as a ghost. The ghost of who he could have become if he had chosen to meet her where she already stood. She was never the storm he feared. She was the calm before it, the sacred stillness that reveals everything out of alignment. The kind of woman whose silence is more instructive than any lecture, because in her absence, he sees the wreckage of what he called connection and realizes it was never intimacy, only noise. A man cannot forget a woman who held up a mirror to his soul and asked for nothing. Not because she didn't care, but because she had already learned love that is coerced is not love at all. She gave him something rare, the opportunity to meet her in truth. And when he couldn't, she didn't punish him. She let him go in the most haunting way possible by retreating into her peace. Carl Jung spoke of the anima as the key to a man's individuation, the deep feminine within him that draws him toward his own soul, often through projection onto women he believes he desires. But the ones who truly activate the anima, they're not always easy to love, because they come not to comfort, but to awaken, not to entertain, but to elevate. And so she entered not as a fantasy, but as a threshold, a test, a calling. She didn't seduce with strategy. Her allure was unconscious, archetypal, felt more than seen. The way she carried herself, unbothered and aware. The way her eyes didn't plead for attention, they penetrated, quietly asking, "Can you meet me here where I already am?" It wasn't her beauty that disarmed him. It was her embodiment. She moved as if she had nothing to prove, nothing to win, and nothing to fix in a man. She didn't make herself smaller to soothe his ego. She didn't sparkle on command. She rested in her skin, in her worth, in the knowing that her soul was already whole, with or without his recognition. This kind of woman doesn't haunt a man because she tried to make him stay. She haunts him because she didn't. She let him walk away, and that freedom carved a scar deeper than attachment ever could. He expected drama, confrontation, perhaps even heartbreak. But what he got instead was her silence, her absence, the unbearable realization that he was no longer in the presence of a woman who once believed in him more than he believed in himself. And now, long after her voice has faded, he replays every moment, but not the way it happened, the way it should have. He sees her eyes, not in memory, but in dreams. He hears her laughter echo in empty rooms. He tries to recreate her energy in women who don't carry her soul, and nothing satisfies. Because when a woman becomes a man's mirror, when she reflects not just his potential, but his refusal to claim it, she becomes unforgettable. And it's not her body that lingers. It's her witnessing. The way she looked at him like he was more. The way she held him accountable without saying a word. Now his world moves on. But beneath the surface of every distraction, every conquest, every performance, she exists. As a pulse, as a memory, as the one who didn't chase him, but chose herself. And that is the difference. She didn't need him to pick her. She needed him to rise. And when he didn't, she left not in bitterness, but in reverence for her own becoming. He didn't just lose her. He lost the version of himself only she could have awakened. And so, in the silence between dreams, in the soft ache behind his smiles, she lives on, not as a wound, as a whisper of what it means to be loved by a woman who knows her worth. She wasn't the loudest chapter in his life, but she became the most indelible. Not because she filled his world with drama or desire, but because she withdrew in a way that made everything else feel lifeless by comparison. She didn't vanish to punish. She simply no longer made herself available to a frequency that couldn't hold her. The kind of woman who enters a man's dreams uninvited is not doing so with intent. She's doing so by nature. Her energy is the kind he cannot prepare for, because it doesn't just touch him, it undoes him. She is the archetype of the muse and the mirror. The one who awakens longing, not for her, but for the parts of himself he abandoned to survive. To the unawakened man, she is dangerous. Not because she harms him, but because she requires him to feel. To step into the arena of vulnerability, naked, unarmed, and unmasked. She doesn't want his perfection. She wants his presence. And if he cannot give it, she walks, not with fire, but with silence. And that silence? It becomes the loudest ache of his life. Carl Jung would say, he is not obsessed with her, but with what she represents in his unconscious. She is the embodiment of Anima, the doorway to the deep feminine within him. And when that door closes, he is left with himself, no longer distracted, no longer affirmed, just a man standing in the rubble of his own defenses, finally forced to confront the emptiness he's been avoiding. And the more he runs from it, the more she appears. In dreams, in the curves of strangers, in the music he once shared with her. Not because she is still his, but because he never claimed himself. She was not a possession to win. She was a mirror to awaken. And he shattered it. She didn't seduce his body. She seduced his potential. The man he could be if he let go of the masks. If he stopped performing and started being. That's what haunts him. Not the loss of her touch, but the loss of who he was in her presence. Elevated, exposed, unapologetically real. And perhaps now, he tries to rewrite the story. Tells himself she was too much, too intense, too mysterious. But late at night, he knows she was not too much. He was just too small for the kind of love that doesn't beg but beckons. That doesn't demand but reminds. That doesn't chase but chooses itself over and over again. And she moved on, not to another man, to another version of herself. One who no longer waits for potential. One who no longer pours her rivers into deserts. One who recognizes the difference between a man who sees her and a man who needs her to shrink in order to stay. Now she walks softer but stronger, with eyes that no longer search, they see, with a heart that is open but no longer available to half-heartedness, with energy that still seduces, but only those who are ready to rise. Because the woman who enters a man's dreams uninvited has already left his life in peace. And that peace is what unsettles him. That peace is what echoes. That peace is what his soul still whispers for when the world grows quiet. She doesn't linger in his life. She lingers in his awareness. Not because she made herself unforgettable, but because she reminded him of the self he keeps forgetting. She never knocked on his door again, but she's in every doorway he now stands before, reminding him of the threshold he never crossed. The woman who enters a man's dreams without permission doesn't do it through strategy or seduction. She does it by simply being the one thing he can't manufacture, truth in feminine form. There was no performance to her presence, no frantic search for validation, no shape-shifting to fit the image he projected. She stood rooted in her softness, her silence, her certainty. And it was precisely that stillness that disturbed him most, because he could not dominate it. He could not control or manipulate it into comfort. You see, some men are terrified of the woman who sees them, not the version they display, but the man beneath the armor, the little boy behind the ego, the unclaimed soul beneath the applause. And she doesn't rescue that boy. She lets him rise. And if he won't, she leaves, not in cruelty, but in clarity. This clarity is what burns. It is what echoes. It is what awakens him in the middle of the night, breathless, restless, aching. It's not her absence that destroys him. It's the integrity of her exit. She didn't ghost. She didn't scream. She didn't destroy. She simply stopped overgiving. She simply stopped holding space for a man unwilling to meet her at depth. And the masculine psyche, according to Jung, is wired to chase what withdraws with mystery. The anima, his inner feminine, does not respond to compliance. She responds to radiance wrapped in restraint. This is why he dreams of her, because in her quiet refusal, she becomes larger than life. Not because she is manipulative, but because she is complete. He remembers how she made the mundane sacred, how her presence turned silence into communion. He now hears her laughter in conversations that can't reach him, sees her outline in bodies that don't know how to hold his soul. He touches flesh, but none of it feels like her, because none of it carries that ancient knowing, that sacred untouchability she wore like skin. She didn't beg to be kept. She allowed herself to be lost. And that is what breaks men in half. Because when a woman refuses to chase, she becomes the compass by which he measures every other connection. And no one else quite matches her alignment, her self-possession, her refusal to betray herself for love. And deep down, you know this kind of woman is rare. Perhaps you've been her. Perhaps you've walked away. Perhaps you've stayed quiet while your soul screamed for him to see you. But you didn't scream. You simply breathed. And in that breath, you reclaimed everything you gave. And now, somewhere out there, he's replaying it all. Not the drama, not the highs, but the stillness. The way you held space for his greatness, even when he ran from it. The way your energy wrapped around his edges and softened the walls he swore no one could enter. And the way you disappeared, not into another man's arms, but into your own healing. And now, when he dreams, it isn't of your body, it's of your essence. That haunting, holy force he couldn't hold, not because you were too much, but because he was not yet ready for a woman who needed nothing but to be met at soul level. And you're no longer waiting. You are becoming. You are choosing. And you are seen not by those who cannot hold you, but by the parts of yourself you finally stopped abandoning. There is no greater ache in the masculine heart than realizing she loved him without needing him, touched him without binding him, and left him without wounding him. Because that kind of departure doesn't scar, it restructures. It rearranges the very foundation of how he defines connection, intimacy, and worth. She didn't walk away to be chased. She walked away because she refused to keep pouring sacred energy into a well that didn't know its value. She stopped whispering her softness into his chaos, stopped offering healing where there was resistance, stopped holding herself hostage to the hope that he might one day rise into the man he was always meant to become. And now he sees her, not in the obvious, but in the absence. The way sunlight feels lonelier without her there to reflect it. The way his song stings deeper because it once played while she looked at him like he was kingdoms wrapped in skin. The way he can't laugh the same because when she laughed, it was a sound that believed in something. Carl Jung would say that she activated a shadow, not the darkness he feared, but the light he refused. She became the embodiment of what he denied in himself: depth, devotion, clarity, soul. And in denying her, he denied that awakening, that descent into the part of himself that could finally kneel before truth. He doesn't spiral because she was perfect. He spirals because she saw him and still offered a place to rest. He spirals because he threw away what wasn't transactional. He spirals because he lost a woman who would have met him where it mattered, not with praise or power, but with presence. And perhaps now, he sits in rooms full of noise but feels the weight of her silence. Perhaps he touches other bodies but longs for the way her energy curled around him like a prayer. Perhaps he pretends to forget her name, but dreams of the way she said his, not to control, but to call him home. And that is what he missed. Not just her attention, but the invitation. The invitation to be more than what the world asked of him. To be whole, to be real, to be enough without performance. And now that door is closed. Not slammed, not locked, simply gone, as if it were never there. Because she doesn't leave in anger. She leaves like seasons change, unapologetically and without return. She becomes the woman he searches for in eyes that don't hold fire, in lips that say all the right things but don't know his soul, in arms that hold him but never contain him the way her silence did. You see, it's not the volume of a woman that haunts a man. It's her stillness, her knowing, her ability to let him go without fracture, because she refuses to shatter for anyone. She doesn't return. She doesn't reach out. She doesn't even exist in his world anymore, except in memory. And that memory, it becomes his reckoning. Because when a high-value woman goes cold, she doesn't punish. She evolves. And when she evolves, she no longer vibrates on the frequency of unawakened men. She leaves not to hurt, but to heal. Herself, her lineage, and the generations of women who stayed too long. She becomes an echo of sovereignty, a ghost of grace, a legend in his psyche. And every woman he meets after her becomes a pale comparison to the one who didn't beg to stay, but blessed him with the chance to rise and chose herself when he couldn't. She may not know how deeply he thinks of her now, but the universe does. In every moment he recoils from true intimacy, she is present. In every gaze he lowers when a woman meets him with depth, she is remembered. In every attempt to replicate what was once real but inconvenient, she lingers, not to torture, but to teach. Because the woman who enters a man's psyche without trying is the one who activated his becoming. Not by force, not by seduction, but by being. She does not play games. She does not dim herself to be approachable. She does not seduce with tactics. She seduces by being unapologetically whole. And wholeness to a fractured man is terrifying. Not because he doesn't want it, but because he doesn't yet believe he deserves it. Jung spoke of the feminine as a mirror to the masculine's path to individuation, the long and painful journey into wholeness through the reconciliation of opposites. She was the invitation to that journey, and he declined it. He chose the path of distraction, easier loves, safer stories, women who didn't require him to become. But the psyche doesn't forget. The soul doesn't delete what it once recognized as sacred. And long after she's gone, she shows up not in his phone, but in his shadow. In every regret he tries to outrun. In every poem he doesn't finish. In every moment he's alone with silence. And her name surfaces without mercy. He spirals not because she hurt him, but because she refused to. She didn't enter the battle of egos. She didn't lower herself to win. She walked away, crowned in clarity, robed in restraint, carrying the weight of her unspoken love with dignity. And that is the most haunting part. She would have stayed. She would have given him worlds. But only if he met her where it mattered, beyond performance, beyond fear, beyond the wounds of boys pretending to be men. Instead, he mistook her silence for softness, her grace for passivity, and her leaving for cruelty. But in time, he learns that not all silence is surrender. Learns that some women leave not to be chased, but because they finally remembered their worth. Learns that love, in its truest form, does not cling, it blesses, and it releases. She was not perfect, no goddess sculpted in myth. She had shadows. She had wounds, but she was real. And being real in a world addicted to performance is revolutionary. Now, when he speaks of her, if he ever does, it's with a reverence he didn't offer when she was near. Now, when he thinks of her, it's not just of what she looked like. It's of how she felt, how she saw him, how she never tried to fix him, only loved him enough to leave when he wouldn't fix himself. And her silence? It rewired his psyche, not in a way he understands yet, but in the way he now aches for peace, depth, and presence, and doesn't know why. It's because he once had it, and he lost it, not to fate, but to fear. And you, the woman listening, know this. You know what it means to be her, to be the one who gave without need, to be the one who left without hate, to be the one who changed a man's soul and never looked back. So keep walking, keep evolving, keep choosing peace over performance, integrity over illusion, and silence over begging to be seen. Because the most powerful woman is not the one who is remembered by many. It is the one who changed one man so profoundly he could never unsee the truth she left behind. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.